So welcome everybody. I'm Atlanti Moquette, the founder of Giving Women. And as part of the work that we do, we organize these panel conversations. We like to call them conversations because they really are conversations about issues that are facing women in the most underserved communities, which is the focus of our work and the project with whom we are working. We are looking at gender-based violence, and I need to put in a caveat that we recognize that the issue of gender-based violence is one that is very complex and multi-layered, and that today what we're looking at is only one part of the story. We're looking at mostly domestic violence and how it affects women in the most underserved communities. Our focus is to look at prevention and identification, which is often something that we realize is not always easy because of the social norms. It's sometimes recognized as being normal to undergo some sort of gender-based violence in certain communities, and then the healing. So we have a big project, a big program in front of us, so I won't keep everybody talking. As I fear that we may be having quite long discussions and questions, I just want to take this opportunity to thank Julie for moderating from the Oak Foundation and all the wonderful panelists that have offered their time. And it is a process, so they have offered a lot of their time to make this event happen. So a big thank you to all the panelists. We will be sending out a follow-up after the meeting, and where there will be some documentation that will appear in the chat. But that documentation you will receive in the follow-up afterwards with links to all the projects that we are presenting here today. And just one other thing, please put your questions in the chat. Kathleen and I will be following them, and maybe Sophie also, so that if there is a particular question that is relevant to what is being discussed, we may interrupt and bring in that question. So please feel free to keep your questions coming onto the chat. So I think I've covered everything, and thank you all for joining us today. We have a lovely group of people here, and I pass it on to Julie.
Thank you very much, Atlanti. I'm Julie Broome. I'm the director of the Issues Affecting Women program at the Oak Foundation. I'm based in our London office, but some of you might have met our Geneva-based team in the past. It's a real pleasure to be here with you for this webinar on GBV prevention, identification, and healing. Just to reiterate what Atlanti said, we will be focusing in this conversation really on violence against women and girls, even though that is just one facet of gender-based violence. I also just kind of wanted to start out by highlighting that violence against women and girls is really a global issue. Rates might be higher in certain countries or locations than others, but really no region is exempt from this problem. And even though 149 countries have laws addressing domestic violence or intimate partner violence, they require enforcement, which often doesn't happen. So this is, an issue with a lot of prevalence, and I'm sure all of us have heard the statistics that 1/3 of women globally have experienced physical or sexual violence at some point in their lifetime, often perpetrated by a partner, or a current or former partner. And recently, we've seen a real global uptick in tech-facilitated gender-based violence as well, really reflecting the nature of our society and how that is changing in terms of how we interact with each other. And in this year, 2025, we've really seen some significant cuts to funding for gender-based violence and violence against women and girls. The foreign aid budgets of many governments, including USAID, the Dutch government, the UK government, have been cut, which is likely to have a very detrimental effect on the services that are provided in many parts of the world. So I think this is an important moment for us to be thinking about how do we support survivors of GBV and how do we build up that prevention work? So really looking forward to this conversation with our panelists today. We have 5 wonderful practitioners and experts with us who are going to share some of the challenges and opportunities they've encountered around identification and prevention, and also just reflect on what individuals and communities need in order to heal from that violence. So I'm just going to go around quickly and ask each of the speakers just to introduce themselves, because I think they can do themselves better justice than I can. So I'm just going to go in the order that I see you on my screen. Alessandra, could you just give us a brief introduction to yourself?
Sorry, Julie, just tech problems to get us started. I'm Alessandra Guedes. I'm from Brazil originally, and I've been working on ending violence against women and children for about 30 years now. And at the moment, I sit at UNICEF's Global Office of Research and Foresight, and I particularly look at the intersections between violence against children and violence against women. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Teresa.
Hello, everyone. It's really good to see you all. My name is Teresa Gakwa, and I currently work as the program manager at Be That Girl Foundation, which is a Swiss foundation that works with locally led organizations, particularly in Africa, that support women and girls, the goal of which is that each woman and girl can live a self-determined life. And in my career, particularly in my previous role at another organization, I worked with survivors of sexual violence, supporting them through education, trauma healing, and just really helping them get to a place where they're thriving. Really excited to be here today.
Thank you, Teresa. Quinta, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Quinta Wambulwa. I am the survivor of TFGBV, that's Technology Facilitated Gender-Based Violence, and it is what has inspired me to start the foundation Girls for Girls Africa Mental Health Foundation to support other survivors access mental health care and even justice while they continue to heal in the communities. We work in Mombasa, Kilifi, and Kwale in Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you. And Daniela.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniela Valdivia from Bolivia. I started a nonprofit already 12 years ago called Huellas y Futuro, Footprints and Future. And we strive basically for violence prevention in general, but we focus a lot on domestic violence. We try to protect mainly women and children from this problem because we believe that domestic violence is the root cause of all violences. If we experience violence within the family where we should feel protected, then everything goes wrong. And we also focus on women empowerment. We try to provide with training, seed capital to vulnerable women that do not have access normally to these services in the community. So that's for us another way to prevent violence.
Thank you. And finally, oh, sorry.
Happy to be here. That was
yes, great. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. And finally, Jane, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jane Anyango. I'm the founder and executive director of Polycom Girls. Polycom is simply many community programs. We are over 20 years old, working with adolescent girls and women living in various slum settlements across Kenya. We started small as community women responding to an issue in their community. We have grown very naturally, and now a non-governmental organization working beyond Kibera. I'm just so happy to be here, to be speaking today on issues around GBV when we're actually celebrating the 25 years since the United Nations Security Council on Resolution 1325. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jane, I wanted to really start the conversation with you. So while you're here, we'll keep you. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how GBV shows up in the communities that you work with, and what are some of the challenges that you've encountered in identification of GBV?
Yeah, thank you so much. And as I said before, I'm so happy to be part of this conversation. Yeah, so GBV is, it's something that has been socially accepted in most communities where I come from. Yeah, because of, we have the aspect of people being too poor to speak up. We have people being taken advantage of. We have people who are just facing violence and they don't even know that they're facing violence. I want to talk particularly on sexual harassment and assault, where we have younger people, like we have people seeing it coming. It doesn't just happen. If you look at the statistics, then we are talking about more than 60% of survivors known to their perpetrators. So they actually see it coming, but there's nothing they can do about it. And in fact, if they go to report, then nobody listens to them. So you find that someone is looking at you suggestively, and you just like, what do I do? What do I tell someone? If I tell someone I'm going to be victimized, they try to touch you, you talk about it, then you're victimized again. They even attempt to abuse you, then you are victimized again. And until it happens, then everyone is running everywhere, trying to help you, running after the perpetrator. So the way GBV it's very, very hard to just can I say stop it before it happens. So as an organization, we have a platform we call the Talking Box. So the Talking Box, we have different forms of sexual harassment, forms of sexual harassment that we have been able to put in some graphics manner. And we are able to have these ones in schools where kids are able to identify and then report to us through these locked up boxes. They report to us what they experience. They report to us when they see it coming. They report to us when people make comments that they are not very comfortable with. They report to us when people try to exploit them sexually. Like, in our community, we buy water. So we have those sexual favors where they are given water for free, or they are supported to jump the queue, and in exchange, they are supposed to give sex. So they are able to tell us when it is just happening. But it's still very, very challenging, because when you try to bring different stakeholders into the conversation, they want proof. You cannot prove harassment. You cannot prove the attempts. You can only prove when it actually happens. And the cost of treating, or the cost of response, is so high that I just wish that we would all just rally ourselves and prevent violence when we can. We should all rally ourselves and tell people what violence is all about, and that the survivor should not be re-stigmatized by blaming them. So when we talk about GBV, we also have the intimate partner violence, where mostly okay, I know nowadays we also talk about women as the perpetrators, but mostly it has been like men mostly as the perpetrators, and women are, someone is just scared to report. If I report, I'm going to lose him. If I report, then what are people going to say? If I report him, then what next is going to happen to him? What if he is arrested? Or there's just that prayer that he's going to change. So at the end of the day, it's very, very hard for people to know. People come out laughing and smiling when actually in the real life they're facing a lot of violence. So in my over 20 years of work, I believe that we all stakeholders should work together to just make sure that we are able to prevent violence. As an organization, we work very closely. We know the message that we pass to the community when we're working in the community. We are actually very rooted in the community. Our survivors are members of the community. Like our volunteers are members of the community. The people we co-create with are members of the community. The volunteers are members of the community. So they resonate with the challenges that, as far as GBV is concerned, within our community. So they are able to come up with very tangible, very, very tangible solutions to, just the way they can be able to prevent it. We also work with other civil society organizations within the community. We have stakeholders. We have managed to set up a stakeholders platform where we all sit on quarterly basis to ask people, what are you doing about this? So we are able to co-create together, because we are working for the same community, so that we are not duplicating, we are not confusing the community, but we are co-creating and working together. We also work together to work with the institutions. We have the local institutions, the local government institutions. We have the very clear pathways within our communities, which at times is very hard to strengthen because I think we have those ideas, but getting funds to strengthen these structures at times is very challenging. But if we take that, the aspect of bringing everybody on board, we are looking at the communities, the social cultural spaces, then we are looking at the civil society spaces, and we are looking at the institutions, then it makes it even easier because we are all vigilant. We are all looking at what we want to make better in our community. And as a result of that, we are able to move forward. So this is something that we have done over the years and, very accepted. But we also have a challenge that most donors don't trust the community-led initiatives. The community-led initiatives are rarely funded, The community-led initiatives are, I don't know how I can put it, but mostly the locally led initiatives rarely get funding for the initiatives that they try to respond to. So I just hope that by talking here, we can all co-create. I'm so happy that I'm having our fellow Kenyans in here. We just launched our third NAP, the Kenya National Action Plan on Resolution 1325. And interestingly, we are still talking about engagement of the grassroots. There's so much work have been done over the years, and communities are now so much empowered to identify, prevent, and even work through the healing. So if you can just have the spirit of trusting communities and just making sure that we are working with them on what has worked for them that can be scaled up, then we will be able to identify, prevent, and even work through our healing process. Otherwise, thank you so much. I'm so, so happy to be part of this conversation. And I'm so, so happy to just continue sharing what has worked for us over the years for us to grow as that tiny organization of just 15 women trying to protect their daughters to this big NGO that is not now working beyond this community of Kibera. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. That was a really inspiring start. Thank you very much. Alessandra, I wanted to come to you and draw on your experience with UNICEF what are the sort of particular considerations we should keep in mind when we're thinking about gender-based violence and adolescent girls or children?
Thanks, Julie, and thanks, Jane. Jane touched on so many important points, including the different manifestations of gender-based violence, the importance of having sort of a life course perspective, and of course, the crucial importance of trusting the community to know, what interventions may be most effective. So I want to make 3 points in terms of adolescent girls, and I'm so glad that this conversation is taking that life course perspective. One is that girls experience gender-based violence, particularly sexual violence and intimate partner violence, at higher risk than boys. The second one is that the consequences of gender-based violence for girls include multiple negative consequences that relate to their sexual and reproductive health. And the third point is that addressing gender-based violence amongst adolescent girls requires us to have very tailored strategies for both prevention and response. So my first point, and I know it's tricky and you touched on this, Jane, it's hard for us to talk about the different ways that violence impacts boys and girls, men and women, without getting into some sort of competition about who experiences it the most and for whom the consequences are worse. And I really want to steer away from that. We know that it's true that boys and girls both experience sexual abuse. And, we know, for example, that when we look at rates of homicide, young men and boys are at higher risks. So this is about using the evidence to show us how different forms of violence affect different sexes throughout the life course so that we can better prevent and respond. It's not about a competition. The thing about adolescent girls is that they face alarming rates of intimate partner violence globally. And we heard from Julie the number that gets quoted the most often, the 1 in 3 women. If we break down the age disaggregation, nearly a quarter of adolescent girls between the ages of 15 and 19 who have been in a relationship, and that's close to 19 million girls, will have experienced either physical or sexual intimate partner violence by the time that they reach the age of 20. And you'll notice that I didn't include there the emotional intimate partner violence, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But there's a bit of a challenge in terms of how to measure that and how to compare that across countries. But if we add the emotional IPV, which many survivors say is the hardest form to endure, those numbers go even higher. If we look at early in child marriage, we know that nearly 1 in 5 girls are married by the age of 18, and that prevalence is about 6 times higher than boys. And the thing about this increased prevalence of sexual violence and IPV against girls is that it's fueled by unequal and harmful gender norms that sexualize and objectify girls in many societies. We've heard from both Julie and Jane. This is not a problem that's unique to a particular country, to a particular socioeconomic strata. This cuts across all cultures, all geographic regions, and all socioeconomic levels. And these norms both objectify girls, and at the same time, they promote forms of masculinities that emphasize aggression, that emphasize power, that emphasize control. And adolescence in particular is a critical period, as we know in the life course, when both boys and girls experience not only physiological and cognitive changes, but also important social transitions. The sad thing is that many of these transitions that girls experience, for example, the development of breasts, the onset of menstruation, and of reproductive capacity, bring about social risks that are uniquely affect girls. And so now I move to my second point, which is the consequences that sexual violence can have for girls. Obviously, sexual abuse, including by intimate partners, can have lifelong consequences for both boys and girls, for their physical health, for their mental health. And often these consequences can last well into adulthood and interestingly connect with conditions that we wouldn't think are necessarily connected to those forms of violence, such as non-communicable diseases, and of course, all sorts of mental health conditions. But sexual violence can lead to multiple negative effects that are unique to girls' sexual and reproductive health, including unintended pregnancies and the related health risks that are associated with childbearing, and particularly early childbearing. And the thing is, in many societies, when adolescent girls marry early or when they become pregnant, they may be denied lifelong opportunities, for example, to attend school, to access adequate employment, and to gain financial security, which can then set them in this trajectory that increases not only their own risks of poor health, but also that of their children and families. And that is why we need to be really intentional when responding to the needs of adolescents, including adolescent girls who have experienced GBV. We can't assume that services that are designed for adult women will meet the unique needs of this population. The good thing is that when we're thinking about prevention, and Jane touched on this too, is that adolescence offers us an important window for intervening before gender norms become ingrained. And I'll come back to that point later in our conversation. So over for now.
Thank you, Alessandra. Daniela, I wanted to come to you now, and Alessandra sort of alluded to this a little bit, but I wondered if you could say a little bit about how we should understand violence when we're talking about GBV. You know, does violence always have to be physical in nature? What does this encompass in this context?
Well, thank you for the question. Actually, it's incredible how I can relate to everything that Jane and Alessandra said, being on the other side of the world. Well, Bolivia is next to Brazil, but still her experiences are like from all over the world. And Jane, like I can relate with every single thing she mentioned because it's exactly the same experience we are experiencing in Bolivia. Well, gender-based violence is basically any sort of violence inflicted to a woman because she is a woman. It can be, in Bolivia, in the legislation, for instance, we have like 16 types of violence. But I think the most common are physical, sexual, We also have misogyny. We have economic. We have violence at workplace. We have like medical violence. So we have like really many. But the main thing is that the sort of violence is committed because she's a woman, right? So I think this is something that we shouldn't underestimate because as well as Jane was saying, they normally, you know, when we come to the justice operators, they really want to see proofs. They really want to see what happened. But there are many things that happen are called violence, but they don't have proof or they don't have like a tangible evidence. Therefore, I would say that it's very important to pay attention, for instance, to psychological violence and misogyny, like which is called microaggressions. We normally think, oh, that's fun. Or when, you know, I will give some example of microaggression when we see someone driving on the way very bad or like crossing a red light, and we come up with something like, oh yeah, it must be a lady or something like that. For instance, this kind of thinking, it perpetuates this idea that it's all right to think like that. It's all right to point at a woman when something is done wrongly, right? I think that's why I'm saying like microaggressions or psychological violence that are really never paid attention to are very important because it's also another type of violence that could kill a person. You know, normally when we have in Bolivia, for instance, people filing this kind of aggressions, psychological violence or economical violence, police officers that say like, oh yeah, sorry, but I need to pay attention to this other woman that has a broken leg or a black eye, you know. And I think if you don't pay attention to these little or microaggressions, but also to these other cases of psychological violence, it can lead to a femicide. Cochabamba, where we are based, is the heart of Bolivia, is the city with the highest rates of femicides. And what happened when you have a femicide, normally nobody knows what happened. But why? They were very okay. She was very happy. They have children. They never filed any case. So how? Yeah, because it's something that is scaling and scaling and scaling, and we are not paying attention. And it's exactly how Jane mentioned that women are scared to file or report any sort of violence they live with the intimate partner. And also, not only because, okay, I'm going to lose this person and he won't be willing to give me a lemonade for my children, or I don't know what to do. I have never worked in my life, so I will be living in the street. So they don't do that because of that. But also those women that dare to do that, they encounter people that say, this is not important, please wait, there are cases that are much more important. And I think that's the wrong way. That's why we really focus on prevention of violence in general, because if we don't know where in the violence, in the timeline, where in the violence is happening, and we don't know or we don't intervene exactly where we should be intervening, it's very likely to have a case of femicide. And I'm talking about femicide because Bolivia is one of the top countries in femicides. I don't know the cases of the other colleagues, but that's why we really try to focus on preventing all sorts of violence. We also speak with children since early childhood, since 4 or 5 years when they are in the kindergarten. What is misogyny? What is misogyny? It's very normal that children also take for granted that dad can beat up mom. That's very normal. You know, I was very scared the first time that I asked a child, oh, you didn't come yesterday to the activity, and he was like, oh yeah, that's because my daddy was beating up my mom, and he broke her leg, and then she had to go to hospital, and so I had to stay at my neighbor's. Yeah, so I couldn't come, you know, like very very natural. So it's this is scary, in that our societies are really naturalizing violence because we don't talk about it. We only talk about it when we see it at the latest scale. Okay, we see a black eye, or we see someone with bruises, or someone going to hospital, or femicides, but not even like that, because we have so many femicides during the year. I mean, the last 2 years ago, we had more or less every 6 days one femicide. That was really, really mean. And you could have really said something, but it was very normal. You were watching the TV or the news, and there was something about femicide coming up, and people were acting normal because it was something of on a daily basis. You hear about it every time, and you don't pay attention. So that's why I think it's very important to talk about all sorts of violence, to start talking also about structural violence that come from the state, to start talking about microaggressions, to start talking about economical violence that comes from the intimate partner. Most of all, we have to pay attention on mental health. That's something very important. Women sometimes are really claiming for help, and we don't pay attention, and afterwards then we see some suicides. So yeah, I think gender-based violence is not only physical, is not only something that happens from the intimate partner towards women, but it's something that is out there, and we should be paying attention and talking about that to raise awareness.
Thank you so much, Daniela. Those are some very striking statistics you shared from Bolivia, so thank you for that. Quinta, I wanted to come to you now. I mean, you identified yourself at the beginning as a survivor of technology-facilitated GBV. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about, you know, what that is and what it's like, and you know, how does our understanding of GBV really need to evolve to encompass this sort of technological world that we and girls are living in today?
Thank you, Julie, and thanks to all the speakers for just laying the ground, because the realities that I'm about to speak on is exactly also what's happening in the technology world. The lack of support, victim blaming, and all of that. So again, my name is Quinta Wambulwa. I am a survivor of technology-facilitated gender-based violence and the founder Girls for Girls Africa Mental Health Foundation. Now, in 2018, I broke up with my boyfriend, and we had dated for over 7 years. This is someone that I met when I was still in high school. My first love, and so we really kicked it off. It was beautiful at the time. I was in high school. I remember my parents weren't for the idea, but of course, I think adolescence. And so we continued the relationship later into the university. And I remember even during that time, he would, you know, tell me not to rely so much on parents. He can take care of me and pay the bills and do everything. So while I was in campus, I heavily depended on him to pay my accommodation and just a few expenses here at the campus at the university. So at the time, I was in Mombasa, and for him, he was in Nairobi. So because of the distance, a lot of times we would find ourselves chatting and sending each other nudes. And for me, because there was consent, that happened to me, where I'm sending him my nudes, he's sending me his nudes. And, you know, just a way of showing love and continuing the long distance relationship. Now, that was in around 2016, and I completely forgot. I completely forgot
and the other
about.
one, is it possible to refund the other one?
Tavia, you need to mute yourself. Thank you. Apologies, Quinta, continue.
No worries. So at that time, I of course, now when that is happening, 2016, you forgot about it, because now in 2018, we broke up around issues on cheating. And so I decided to end the relationship and focus on my studies. But it didn't come easy when I ended the relationship, because I struggled with depression, anxiety. I mean, this is someone that I had already depended on for a very long time. So ending the relationship when I was in my third year wasn't easy, but I needed to do that for my healing. And so when I did that, I fell into depression, wanted to try suicide at some point, was rescued, was taken to the psychiatric ward. And while I was at the ward, I then started learning about mental health issues around depression and medication. So I got the chance to start the foundation, because at that time, in school, I was isolated. I ran into depression, moved in to live with my auntie. Life was just not okay, but people around me didn't know how to support me. So for me to start the foundation really was to first start raising awareness around mental health. So at that time, I started getting a lot of publicity in school. I vied as a president. I was on the papers telling my story with depression and how I almost even took my life. And so I featured on the newspaper sharing the story. And the following day, now my ex-boyfriend sent my newspaper public. So you can imagine all the publicity you've received after the work you're doing. And then the following day, you find yourself again all over the internet. So it really, really shocked me. It broke my heart. I remember again, I became suicidal. I remember my parents calling me, asking me what's happening, because the news was sent to my parents. They were sent all over the internet, everywhere in school. I had vied as a president, so already my name was out there. So it really was hard. I remember I wanted to, of course, I went to report to the police. And when I went to the police, the first question was, but why did you take pictures in the first place, you know? And so even at that time in 2018, you can see already there were no rules and laws that would support survivors. So I remember even my parents feeling like we don't have enough money to follow up with cases, so we'd rather just let it go and pray to God. But I think I got a conviction to now raise awareness around survivors, around online violence and healing. So for me, instead of really following about the cases with the court, I went back to therapy, went back to school to study psychology. So I just went in to heal and just learn and talk about it. And now the mission at Girls for Girls also stopped just focusing on mental health, on just depression, but now we went into trauma-informed for survivors. And so I found purpose, healing in just talking about it. And this is now 2018. We went in 2019, just raising awareness around it. And then I think during COVID is where people started actually paying attention around mental health. And then now online violence really was on the rise, because you could see exactly a continuum where it starts from the online and then it manifests into the physical world. And so you could also see around the election period, you find a lot of women politicians who their news are sent to the public. You find journalists, when they're just about to do something big, you find it being weaponized against them. And so slowly advocacy started picking up. And I think for me, that is what has really just enhanced even my healing and pushing to see that eventually people are seeing what is happening. I tried so much to have the nudes removed. Again, that's something else that nobody talks about, because again, the internet doesn't forget. So I know part of the healing has been making peace with the fact that maybe forever they will have to be on the internet, because I mean, the people maybe would have downloaded and kept them. So even if we were speaking to Meta and they were saying how it's just hard to sort of erase some of the issues, especially with Telegram. So it's just a lot of issues around technology that a lot of even stakeholders involved don't know how to handle it. And I think when we're looking at evolution and the emerging trends on GBV is exactly looking at TFGBV is actually violence. And when we start centering survivors' voices and actually knowing that a lot of this is in misogyny, power dynamic, when we already start seeing the exact forces are on GBV are the exact one, even on TFGBV, then we'll start not victim blaming, we'll start shifting on how do we then center survivors, how do we then support the survivors to actually get care, heal, and what is healing for them. And so we need to already reflect on the digital realities that women and girls face, especially when it comes to online violence, and especially on their mental health, because a lot of times we can't measure pain. And you see, with the Kenyan system, police are going to be asking, like there's another speaker who spoke here about police are so used to seeing the physical pain that when you're going with online violence, they can't measure the magnitude of the pain. And so it's not like a serious case to them. So you find that a lot of survivors are not supported. They're minimized. The trauma is minimized. They're not validated, and most of them end up dying by suicide, just getting lost in drugs. So how do we even right now? I'm happy that we're working with UNFPA on how do we then make sure that of all the structures that we're having in the system on GBV, we need to now start putting in the TF-GBV angle. And also, when it comes to reporting mechanisms, how do we empower and build capacity on the first responders to also understand how to actually cater for the victims of TF-GBV? How do we make sure that the Ministry of Health equally knows in their forms, puts TF-GBV as a form of violence where survivors need mental health care? So how do we start shifting all these dynamics? Because you can find that now, for my case in Kenya and in Mombasa specifically, the only cases that are going to the county commissioner are GBV. And when you're asking questions, why don't you have cases on TF-GBV? Because again, for the county or rather for the government to change policies, they need data. So you find that there's no data even reported. So when you're asking the county commissioner, the only problem they have is that there's a section of TF-GBV on their forms. How hard is it to just implement that initially already and have all these data captured, victims supported, systems changing, and just being able to know that TF-GBV is real and it actually affects survivors' mental health? And how do we even build systems online? Because already it's violence happening online. So I'm imagining if we could have even systems of care online that are easily accessible for the survivors to just allow them to heal and thrive back in their communities.
Thank you, Quinta. I just want to really thank you for sharing your story with us and for your bravery and just carrying on this fight. It's really very inspiring to hear from you. So thank you for that. Teresa, I want to turn to you now. We've heard a lot about what violence looks like, how this is being perpetrated, and we've talked a little bit about accountability, but I wondered if you could say more about what you see as the barriers to seeking justice for GBV survivors.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you to all the speakers, and thank you, Quinta, for trusting us with your story. I really appreciate it. I think when I think about justice, as far as GBV is concerned, I think about three levels: the individual level, the community or cultural level, and then the systemic level. At an individual level, really, at the basic level, we're talking about someone not even knowing that violation has happened. And I know so many instances, I've worked with so many people who many years later, when they're exposed to certain information, then they're in shock. They're like, oh my God, that means that there was abuse, that I was violated. And that happened to me as well. And so I think the first level of, the first barrier to justice, not knowing that you have been violated or that someone has been violated. I would say the second level is a culture of silence that is fueled by fear, stigma, and, just really a lot of power, negative power dynamics and mistrust. There are many situations where people report that something has happened either to their families or to somebody near them, and the instinct is to silence them. Jen referenced this earlier, and I've seen so many families where a survivor is told, please do not share. You cannot share that for many reasons. Why? Because we depend on this person for our family's livelihood. And so we would rather protect him so that we can make sure that, we continue to be taken care of. I've had situations of people who've been violated in sort of like faith communities, and the instinct is you cannot shame the man of God. What does that look like in what does our image look like? You're going to ruin the reputation of this institution. And so this culture of silence and shame and stigma is a huge barrier to justice, because then that means this person never moves from that place to even the next step, which is reporting. And then I would say the next level is a justice system that seems so distant and inaccessible. Everywhere I have gone and worked with even adolescent girls, and you ask them, what happens if someone is violated? They're blank. They do not know where to report, who to report to. They do not even know what is required. And if you understand the law, you know that there are so many stringent requirements. It's like you have to preserve evidence. You have to report, I don't know within what period of time, even for this case, to hold water. And so without that sense of awareness, then justice is so distant and it's so inaccessible. At the same time, even when somebody accesses it, like Quinta has mentioned, then this justice system in many places becomes an unsafe space, and it becomes a space that traumatizes the survivor. I've worked with people who report to the police, and the first thing the police asks you is, are you sure it was not your boyfriend? As if it would have been okay if it was my boyfriend. Are you sure it's not because of what you're wearing? Up to and including situations where the police themselves have tried to violate this person again. Say things like, can I go with you to see what happened? And it's like, what are you trying to do? So in such situations, Quinta mentioned a situation where it's like, oh, but it's techno, why did you send? So then this place becomes a place that is traumatizing the survivor. And a lot of our systems, and the people, I would call them fast responders, they're not trained, they're not equipped. You meet a police officer or a health practitioner who doesn't have trauma-informed training. They do not know how to handle a survivor, and so they end up re-traumatizing the person. I would say, the last and really big level is the laws and the policies that guide this. You will find that someone reports a case and then there's corruption. It drags for years on end. Justice delayed really is justice denied. And so this person is like 13 years. I know survivors who were like 13 years later, I'm still going back to court. And every time they're like, we lost your evidence, this happened. And so the system frustrates the whole process, and ultimately justice is denied. So those are some of the barriers I see to justice.
Thank you. And I'm gonna stick with you for a minute, Teresa, to see what, in your experience, what do you see as the root causes of GBV, and what are some of the best strategies that you've seen for prevention?
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Julie. The reality, as many speakers before me have mentioned, is that violence doesn't start when violence happens. It starts way ahead. And so I think the root causes are really harmful cultural gender norms that perpetuate power imbalances, that perpetuate just this nature of silence, and that demean and reduce women. I think that's really at the core of it, is what the root causes are. And when these things are normalized, when they become part of the culture, then anything we're doing after that is absolutely difficult. It's like, where are you starting from? You go to a community where I've gone to communities where, for example, marrying what they call like marrying a virgin is associated to health benefits. To begin to undo that is like an entire process. So I think it's rooted in these systemic issues, patriarchy, and all of these harmful norms. Those are the root causes. And I think if we're going to address that, there's strategies I think that would be most beneficial. One, education and awareness, and not just sporadic education and awareness, but systemic, mainstreaming education and awareness on gender-based violence. I love what Daniela talked about, that they're beginning to talk to children, young children, about things like misogyny. These are conversations you hear later, oftentimes after you yourself have experienced this kind of violation. But if we start with all our systems, education system, health system, every system, and we're educating ourselves, building awareness around what is gender-based violence, how does it occur? How do you identify it? Where do you go? How do you report? What are your rights? What are you entitled to? I think that would really be a powerful place to start. And then I'd say the next level is, especially in our cultures, we need to have more intergenerational dialogues. Oftentimes, the people that are, what I say, custodians of culture are very removed from these conversations. And so I think, as much as it's important for us who are aware to have these conversations, we need to take them back to the custodians. I've seen so many spaces where even when a family is convicted about something, if the elder comes and says, this is the way we are going to go, then they just give in. And so I think having intergenerational dialogues about what is this gender-based violence, what harm is it causing, not just the individual, but our community? How do we come together as a community and solve it together, build cultures of respect, of consent, of empathy, and of safety? I think that's important. And then the other thing I would say is we need to have accountability from the home level, the community level, societal level, accountability all around. I'll tell you, this is simple things. It's like I've taught my daughter about consent, and my daughter is young. I taught about consent and about boundaries, and then nice uncle that loves her and imagines that the way to show love is to hug and tickle her. And my daughter says, "Mommy, I don't like that." In that moment, this is a practical situation. I saw the entire family look at me like, get your daughter, girl. Like, why is she doing that? But I had the choice to say, actually, you're going to respect her. You're going to respect her boundaries. And so we need to start from that place, that when something happens that doesn't feel right, that we enforce it from our communities and just in the society at large. People need to be held accountable for their actions. And the final thing I would say is, I read today, which was really heartbreaking, that I think the Iraqi parliament has a new law that is allowing girls from as young as the age of 9 to be married. And whereas I know that there's some places where we have laws in place, one, implementation and accountability isn't happening. We need to make sure that we are following through. We cannot keep singing the same song as we're new law, new policy. No, let us implement and hold people accountable. But then also we cannot be retrogressing. It is 2025. Instituting laws that just take away the rights of women, of girls as young as the age of 9 cannot be accepted. We need to actually fight that and make sure that laws are protecting the rights of every woman and every girl.
Thank you, Teresa. We appreciate that. Daniela, I wanted to ask you about your experience with prevention and what you've seen that works. I also want to draw attention to a question in the chat about whether there are any resources available for people who know someone who is suffering from GBV and want to support them. So if you have any resources you'd like to share, please feel free to mention that in your comments, and any of the speakers feel free to put an answer in the chat. So thank you. So Daniela, over to you.
Thank you so much. Well, it's again, like now I had the opportunity to listen to Quintal and Trisha, and that's to me like hearing the exact same reality that we are going through. So thank you very much for that. I think prevention for us, because we've been doing this for more than maybe 15 years, and then we became in 2011, sorry, an official organization, and I really wanted to do it professionally. I realized that working on prevention is less costly than working on attention. We were also at the beginning providing a lot of services for survivors and mostly trying to help families to get together and restore their relationships, or trying to rehabilitate the aggressors, but that was a lot of money. So we really discovered with the years that if we invest as much as we can in prevention, we can really see the results in the future. On the long run, of course, we cannot stop providing these services to survivors, that's really important and vital. But I think that if we invest as societies, as civil society organizations, state, and I mean, call it anything you want to call it, also private organizations and companies, if we invest in prevention, we are investing in a better world, definitely. So this is the first thing that we should all know, that prevention, and I can make maybe a comparison. Well, for us in Bolivia, it was like the money that we used to work on prevention programs for 10 families for 6 months. That was the same amount of money that we need for one family that is going through the post-violence process, meaning lawyers, accessing justice, and psychological or medical care. Yeah, so that's something maybe we should know, that prevention is really, really important. Okay, so how we do it, and it's very important to hear what Teresa was saying about holding people accountable, and we have a lot of laws, but they are not being implemented, or maybe budget is not being provided by the state. So how we do it, we work a lot on the grassroots. We work with families. We try to work with schools, because school communities are for us more or less a family, more or less the core of a society. So we work with students, teachers, parents, principals, and police stations from the area of the schools, and also some local authorities, not mayor, but under these levels. And we work, first of all, on raising awareness. What is violence? We teach children what is violence, what is domestic violence, what is violence, psychological violence, what is physical violence, what is sexual violence. Sometimes we have parents that are really they have their concerns, because we will be talking about sexual harassment to children, but we explain them the importance for them to know what it is in order to prevent, and then they get it. But it's very hard, because as my colleagues were talking, culturally, it's very hard to talk about these topics and make people understand that it's important. If we don't discuss about it, we won't prevent it. So we start with raising awareness. Really, basically, we talk about what is misogyny. Like, the children sometimes also assume that all domestic chores should be done by moms, and that shouldn't be like that. We also talk about domestic violence in general, psychological violence. We teach children, for instance, that if it hurts in the heart, then it is violence. And we say, like, if it hurts on the body, it is physical violence. We teach this basically in the whole level of school, so meaning from 4 or 5 years old to 18. And we also talk about this with parents and teachers in a different methodology, because we have to go in different levels. After that, we try to see, and I think it comes very organically, that families that are going through violence, they just show up and they ask for help, because they know. We never point people and say, hey, we would like to talk to you because we've seen these symptoms of violence. No, I think it's very organically that when we talk about violence prevention and we go to raise awareness about that, families show up, or maybe a mom or maybe a child, and says, I'm going through this in my house, or I would like to have some help. So the services are there, open, secretly for everyone. So we go through this second pillar that would be providing services, legal and psychological services. I think mental health is very important, so we always have psychologists to talk to, because the state doesn't provide this service in schools in Bolivia. Then we have the rehabilitation, which is going through maybe legal processes, depending. If we have like cases of, for instance, sexual harassment, of course, we have to call the public prosecutor, and it has to go another way. But if we are talking about one life experience of domestic violence and physical violence, then maybe we can fix it. So that's something very, we choose the cases very carefully. And then we go to capacity building. Capacity building means we provide them with tools, practical tools to identify, to interrupt, and to prevent violence. This is at all levels, also with children. We teach them, for instance, something, because I just read some question, but I didn't read it fully. But for instance, we teach to children what happens if you turn on a match here with fire, and you have another one here, and you put it together. It will have more fire, right? And they say, yeah, yes, or it will turn down. They, no. So we say, yeah. So if we don't want violence to grow, we cannot put them together. If we see violence, we have one main key, and it's interruption. So we provide with different tools, and we have different methodologies for that. Our programs go more or less 2 years, which means like we have these different stages in each pillar. And then talking about this accountability, when we have already people very conscious about the idea of preventing violence and how important it is to talk about this in schools, we take this, let's say, petitions, like people formulating their questions to the state, and we take them to the authorities. So we make this bridge, and we come and say, we would like another law, and we need some budget, and we need this. But we have always these grassroots people backing us up. So we never go and say, hey, mayor, we need this law, and we have to make these changes, and we have to provide these services, and we have to count with certain amount of budget, because it doesn't work like that. For us, the first stage is working with the grassroots, and that they demand their rights, and they claim to the governments to act upon that. So we try to, when we see it, now it's more academical maybe, to violence prevention, we go to 4 stages of change, which is cultural change, social change, economic change, and political change. Talking about cultural and social, it's very similar, but I think Tricia had mentioned this very well. We try to switch the mindset. This is not correct. This is not normal. We should stop doing that. But it was the way we should do that. We have been doing this for the last generations. Yeah, but it's wrong. Yeah, but that's violence. Now there is scientific evidence that we shouldn't be acting or raising our children like that, or we shouldn't be fighting in front of the children, or, so we try to switch the mindset. And then also when we talk about social change, we try to go to different actors of society. And then economic change for us is this economic empowerment. We have to provide resources to women that they are able to leave. Sometimes women never leave the cycles of violence because they don't have work, or they have never worked officially. They don't have studies. They have barely elementary school. So it's for us, it's very important to provide with this the economic factor. And finally, the political level, and that's when we have achieved like the biggest change, is when we have these grassroots and people very conscious about what they need and what they want for the future. And we achieve to make a political change, meaning a law or an amendment to a law or changing, and then it's done. And then we can move forward. Of course, we have to put an eye on this and try to make that the authorities accomplish and that the budgets are given, but still that is how we work, aiming to this political change.
Thank you, Daniela. Appreciate that. Alessandra, coming back again to your role at UNICEF, how does GBV intersect with violence against children, and what does that mean for prevention?
Thanks so much, Julie, and how great to listen to all of the colleagues. So many interesting comments and a lot of work that resonates, right, Daniela, across different contexts. So, I think those of us who've been working in this field for a while know that historically, violence against children and violence against women have been addressed separately. And often what happens is that this leads to different approaches, often different funding streams, different bodies of evidence, and little coordination across these areas. And I think the reason why this has happened is because initially, when we began to address violence against women and gender-based violence, there was a lot of focus on the response, as colleagues have mentioned, particularly in legislations. And there was this perhaps idealistic thought that if we created enough laws, then we would be able to curb and prevent these forms of violence. And over the years, as we have generated a lot of evidence about not only the prevalence, the magnitude of these forms of violence, but also about risk factors that are associated with different forms of violence, then that enables us to start looking at prevention, not only at the response. And I do want to point out that, we often fall into this conversation about, should we prevent, should we respond? Obviously, in an ideal world, we would be able to intervene before any person has experienced violence. But I do think it's important to point out that we live in a world where a great number of people have experienced different forms of violence. So yes, we should be investing in prevention, but we should never overlook the need to respond to survivors. So I don't want us to get into a competition of what's better, because I don't think that serves us. And so as our knowledge about the risk factors of these forms of violence became better, we began to identify that many of the risk factors that are associated with gender-based violence are also associated with different forms of violence against children. And where we've seen more research is around the interactions between child maltreatment or violent discipline that's perpetrated by caregivers and intimate partner violence that takes place in the home or by partners elsewhere. And there is a lot of really interesting data to show, and Teresa and others have alluded to this, that the most consistent risk factor for both the victimization by different forms of gender-based violence, but importantly also for the perpetration of violence against women and girls, is early exposure to violence. So that means that we need to intervene early. We also have some really good data that shows us that even if children don't experience violence directly, if they witness violence against their mothers or their female caregivers, which is how the question is phrased in surveys, they have the same negative consequences over time as if they had experienced violence directly. And that's a point I keep coming back to, particularly when I'm talking to my colleagues in the child protection field, which is even if we were able to prevent all forms of violence against children, if children are still living in households where women are experiencing violence, we would not be preventing the negative long-term consequences of that violence. So it's really important, as we know more about how these forms of violence interact, the fact that often they're taking place in the same families, that we look for opportunities to coordinate across interventions, and that we look for opportunities where perhaps through a single intervention, we can have multiple positive outcomes. And throughout this conversation, the issue of parenting and caregiver support has been mentioned a couple of times, and I shared a resource in the chat because historically, parenting programs and caregiver programs have been implemented for all kinds of outcomes, not just prevention of violence against children, but also early childhood development, immunization, education outcomes. And what we're seeing in recent years is that those same programs, when they are intentionally designed, they have an opportunity to promote gender equality from an early age. And also to prevent not only violence against children, but also violence against women. And I think that's really important because we also know from research that gender norms tend to solidify or become more entrenched during early adolescence, and that's usually around the ages of 10 to 14. And if we look at some of the data, we see that globally around 35% of boys and maybe 34% of girls between the ages of 15 and 19 believe, for example, that intimate partner violence is justified under certain conditions. And the way that this question is asked in surveys is usually, under what conditions would you think that IPV would be justified? And there are things like, if the woman burns the food, if the woman refuses to have sex, if the woman goes out and doesn't ask permission for the husband. And so these are norms that are becoming quite entrenched by adolescents. And this matters a lot because we know that when boys and men who believe that violence against women is acceptable, they're much more likely to use violence against a partner. And some research also suggests that girls and women who also believe those norms are also more likely to experience that violence. And so while promoting positive gender socialization is important across the life course, early adolescence really offers us an important development window to intervene, particularly if we look at adolescents' increased neuroplasticity, maturation, and all this research that's coming out from the more neurological aspects of adolescent brain development. So prevention programs, for example, can create spaces for both boys and girls to critically reflect and question inequitable gender norms, and to support them to build skills that support healthy, respectful, and nonviolent relationships. And there was a question in the chat about apps, and since adolescents and this younger generation spends so much time online, how can we use technology also as a tool for good, as a tool to intervene and prevent these forms of violence? And I also love that we've heard multiple times about trauma-informed approaches, which can promote positive mental health, can help address the consequences of both children's exposure to violence, and by doing that, disrupt this lifelong pattern of violence, including the transmission of violence across generations. And luckily, we are seeing more and more evidence about effective prevention programming for adolescents. And I will pop in the chat 2 frameworks that are used to identify interventions for the prevention of violence against women and violence against children. And not surprisingly, there's a lot of overlap across them. And for example, we've already talked about programs that support parents and caregivers to prevent not only violent discipline, but also simultaneously promote gender equality and prevent IPV. We also see more evidence about programs that tailor adolescents specifically to prevent intimate partner violence. And there's an article that's going to come out next month in the Lancet that does a review of multiple strategies to prevent violence against children and adolescents. And there's strong evidence for programs that can prevent intimate partner violence amongst adolescents. And I also love that school-based programs have been mentioned. Of course, there's a population that's not at school, and we can't overlook that population. But for many kids and adolescents, there's a captive population at schools. And interesting thing is that traditionally school-based violence prevention programs have focused on issues like bullying, but have not always looked at gender-based violence. So there is an opportunity there for us to make sure that programs that are looking at preventing violence through schools are looking at multiple forms of violence, online and offline. And I think looking forward, what we need to be focusing on is to make sure that we're designing these programs for both prevention and response with and for adolescents, to address their age and their gender-specific needs, and to prevent the myriad forms of violence that they experience. You have a population who may be at the same time experiencing forms of violence that are more associated with children, for example, violent discipline, and at the same time experiencing intimate partner violence. So it's a population that's experiencing multiple forms of violence, and we need to respond to that. And I will end by making a plug about the importance of research and making sure that our interventions are informed by the evidence. Obviously, this is important first and foremost to make sure that well-intended interventions do no harm. We have seen over history interventions that are designed with the best of intentions, but that can, for example, re-entrench certain gender norms that are harmful. So we want to avoid that. The second reason why we need to be informed by evidence and research, of course, is to make sure that our interventions can bring the best outcomes possible for women and for girls. And as we started out with Julie talking about the drastic reduction in funding for this area of work, it's really important in an environment of reduced resources that we are guided by the evidence so that we are investing those precious resources in interventions that have been found to be effective, and that we are simultaneously continuing to build that evidence base so that we are generating more creative solutions, because we have some indications of what works, but we definitely need a lot more, particularly considering the scale of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you. Jane, you mentioned a little bit in your first intervention about the work you're doing around prevention, but I wondered if you could say a little bit more about how you're approaching prevention with the communities that you work with, and also just looking at the questions in the chat. If you are working with men and boys in the community, if you could maybe say something about that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we are using, as an organization, we are using a multi-sectoral approach where we are bringing everyone into the conversation. We are ensuring that each and every person is speaking about it, because when we are talking about violence, then we are either all affected, we are either all perpetrators or survivors. And that is why when we're talking about sexual harassment, when we are talking about sexual violence, we like using the word harassment. Because when you talk about violence, there are people who push themselves back and say, you know what, I'm never a perpetrator and I've also never experienced violence. And then we also try as much as possible to use that language that brings everyone into the conversation. That when a child listens, when you are getting to the child, then the child understands. I love what Teresa said about the conversation with her daughter. And in fact, at times it's really complicated when we are talking to teachers and we are telling them, you know what, this is violence. Then they ask us, then how do we discipline them? Then we've just talked about violent discipline. But what alternatives are we giving the teachers? Because these are people who are brought up with, they got their violent discipline. So they feel that this is the way. And that is why it's very important for us to bring everyone into the conversation. And when we are bringing everyone into the conversation, what conversation are we having with who? If we are talking to that small baby in the house, then what are we telling the baby? This is my private part. No one should see it. No one should touch it. No one should play with it. But when we get to adolescent, what are we telling them? And what we have to acknowledge as well is that we are not the only players on the ground. There's somebody else doing something on the ground. So for us not to appear as if we are competing, but complementing, it is good to listen to what is working already on the ground as we work with, as we work in the community. And then the communities are also very different. Someone talked about female genital mutilation. Just the other day, I was hosting the Swedish delegation in my community. And they were very surprised when they heard that we have female genital mutilation in Kibera. But now the question is, do you live your culture when you're moving into the urban settlement? When we are talking about all these forms of GBV, then we acknowledge the fact that they are everywhere and they can happen. We are all either victims or perpetrators, but we must just learn to try as much as possible to work with others to make sure that we address them. We are also trying as an organization to localize the existing frameworks. Like we had the generation equality commitments, where we had the different presidents committing to different things. So as we are mobilizing the communities to be able to hold the government accountable, at least we have something to share. And we, as a grassroots organization, I tell everybody everywhere that yes, we can look into these, the frameworks, but we cannot work to change the frameworks because organizations are working at different levels. We work to make these frameworks touch the ground, because without touching the ground, without the people at the local level understanding the policies that are there and the frameworks that are there, then they're as good as useless because they are not helping the communities in any way. Yeah, so we are very practical. I think my sister from UNICEF has just talked about the frameworks, the strategies that have worked which are rarely supported. We have existed for over 20 years. We have used the talking boxes we have used the talking boxes since the year 2010. We started small. We are currently in over 50 schools. We have schools applying to get the boxes in their schools. But at times we are so scared to scale up to these schools because once we give the boxes and we are not able to collect the content and respond to the girls, then what next? At times we have issues that are very pertinent. In fact, if I had a presentation which I decided not to share, where we had a kid telling us that, I'm so scared that I could be pregnant because my neighbor raped me. I'm just scared that my parents are going to throw me out. So, those are so many problems. And then first, we don't know who the girl is. We have to go into the school and try to persuade them to get the girl, meaning we cannot respond by taking her to the hospital immediately. We cannot prevent her from getting the STDs. So, how do we just approach it? But if we are all working together, if we are all into the conversation, then we can help each other. We can ask ourselves, who is going to talk to the parents? Who is going to talk to the authorities? Which hospital is actually going to treat this girl without asking us for money? Because at times you have no money, for the survivors. But when you pick the case and take this child to the clinic, then it means that you have to spend the money. So it's just so complicated. But if we are able to work together, if we are able to get the girls to identify when they are being abused, because if you don't feel good about it, then it means that it is violent. So you guys must have the conversation at the level in which it occurs. If it's a baby, then you have to talk to this baby for her to understand that what you are experiencing is violence. If this is a mother who is just trying to put up with in a violent relationship, then you have to bring it out in a way that she feels that, what, I should talk about it. I should just be quiet about it. So if we use the multi-sectoral approach with very specific messages, then it means that we're going to have everyone talking, and we are going to have the conversation, and we are going to even be able to prevent violence, because we are going to have people talking. We're going to have children who are able to tell parents, hey, mom, you're shouting. Please talk to me. I'm right here. Just talk to me calmly. I will understand. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. So, finally, Quinta, I wanted to come back to you and ask you if you could share a little bit with us about healing and about the power of taking a survivor-centered approach in this work. I also noted that there was a question in the chat about the potential for platform accountability for TFGBV, and I'm not sure if that's something that you've worked on and might be able to speak to as well. So over to you, Quinta.
Thank you, Julie. And again, I think just listening to all this conversation, I'm happy we're having it because it's timely. And thanks again to all the speakers for all your contributions to this. Now, when it comes to platform accountability, I wouldn't say there's really quite much that has been done, especially now, even for my case and other survivors' cases, because of the repetitive, or rather the vicious cycle. What is being done is right now we have links like from Kictanet, where when your nudes have been sent to the platform, you can actually copy paste the link, and then they can scan and your nudes could be removed. But then the issues is now the vicious cycle that continues when already they have been removed, but there are people who still maliciously put them back. So I think that's something that they're still working on. When we look at I think Telegram is still what's really becoming a menace, especially in Kenya. We have people making money off nudes on the public. So we have people whose accounts are have large numbers, and they get views, they get paid when they're exposing these nudes, and no one is taking charge, even just at the country level. And that's actually that's the pandemic right now in Kenya when it comes to online violence. When it comes to healing, I think I want to speak on that and just even drawing my own experiences from my journey and the survivors that we've been working with at Girls for Girls Africa Mental Health Foundation. Maybe just also to emphasize, UNFPA is also really putting in work in creating awareness. We have a program called MASS that is really trying to raise awareness around TFGBV. So I'm happy that at least on the ground level, also at least that's happening. Now, when it comes to healing, I think we need to first look at a trauma-informed approach that shifts the question from what's wrong with her or to what happened to her to what's strong in her. So I think we need to really be able to understand, and I know Alessandra spoke about it. I'm happy that we are talking about also the childhood traumas that are into all issues around GBV and what young people are already experiencing to what they want to already perpetuate on the digital platforms. So we need to already center survivors. How do we do that? I think it's very important when we're designing our programs, very important to have survivors' voices. I'm happy that a lot of institutions right now are trying to center survivors' voices, which is very key when we want to have survivor-centered approach. We also need to actually have spaces that now allow survivors to get care. What we've done as an organization is we have a toll-free line, and this allows survivors to make the call and speak to a psychologist. And of course, again, the call is used to, again, report cases, and we have the mobile therapy unit that then supports other survivors who found, like I mentioned before, there's a continuum from where the violence started online and then it manifested into the physical violence. So as a generation, I think right now, because we are in the tech world, survivors need spaces where they can heal online as well. So having online spaces, literacy trainings, because again, that's something that most of the survivors need to understand, even how to now prevent themselves better on the digital platforms. We also need to, of course, now hold tech companies accountable. I think it's time to have tech platforms accountable, or rather, they need to put in survivor to put in survivor metrics so that it's easier for survivors to report, to take down, and so it doesn't spread. And like I've always said and emphasized, violence that happens online affects the survivors' real world. And that's from them isolating on social media. And some of them have been using social media, of course, to enhance their education or find opportunities, but you find that when it's happening online, then survivors are not able to stay online. Most of them end up completely being offline, which is something that we look at it as a disadvantage to the survivors. We also need to, of course, again, support the survivors to really just know that they are not alone, because a lot of them, they don't have the spaces online where they can talk about it. So really finding support groups that allow survivors to realize that they're not alone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Quinta. And I thought I would just add a little bit about the tech platform accountability problem, because part of the issue as well is that the tech companies outsource content moderation to people often in low-income countries. Kenya has been a big source of content moderation. For a while, it was Venezuela during the economic crisis. So they pay people very poorly to do this work that is itself quite traumatizing, having to review all of this footage that is quite damaging, and that itself is traumatizing, and the companies are providing no support, no psychological support to those people. So that also then has impacts upstream as the sort of content does not get filtered out because the system is a little bit broken. Are there any questions at this point? I'll look at Kathleen and Atlante. Is there anything that I've missed in the chat that we should try to address?
Yes, I've been following this chat, and quite a few of the questions have been answered by other people following the chat. Just want to say that all the links we will be sharing with you, so don't worry if you didn't get to them. We will be sharing with them, so that's fine. So does anybody have a question they want to ask now that hasn't been on the chat that you'd like to? I mean, it's been such a complete, deep conversation. In many ways, so much is being done. But at the same time, it's also so much still needs to be done in terms of even the way that we go into prevention, the way that we even identify it is kind of overwhelming. And this is only one part of the gender-based violence story. When we hear Quinta, as you were speaking, I was thinking we need to have techniques which are shared to help young people and adults to prevent themselves from being attacked online. And how do you do that? And as you say, and then you come offline, and then you're isolated and can't participate in the world with your courses, with whatever you want to do. So I think that's a whole area which needs an enormous amount of work. I think what's been so interesting is, as I think Daniela said several times, that the story is the same everywhere. The issues are the same everywhere. And I think that in terms of even, parenting, there's so much work that needs to be done to support people in their parenting journey, particularly in situations where people are living such difficult lives and economic hardships and access to food and whatever. And of course, it is so easy to lose your cool and use violence. And so everything is kind of so interlinked that we want to do it. I just wanted to share a little story. I was just in Paris with two of my grandchildren, and they're 11 years old, and they were amazing. We had the most amazing time. But one day we were in a coffee shop, and one of them was talking to her mother and decided to put it on speakerphone and was speaking extremely loudly and disturbing everybody in the coffee shop. And so I said a few times, stop shouting. We are disturbing people. Please stop shouting. Be respectful and so on. And the only way I could get any reaction was I tapped her on the shoulder. And I thought, oh my God, I'm being violent. How easy it is to fall into that situation. And certainly the people who know me, I'm the most unviolent person. So I think that we cannot actually blame some of the mothers that are using, or the carers that are using violence. We've got to help the whole. It's a very broad and difficult job. So I'm confessing for that with my grandchildren. Alessandra,
It's interesting, Atalante, because many, many years ago, I worked with children who have been severely emotionally abused. And this is before I had my kids, who are now 21 and 19. And my interpretation of what was happening to those families nowadays is much more nuanced, let's say, than what was then. But what I wanted to say is actually something that hasn't come up in the conversation, which I think is really important, is that the issues that we're talking about are inherently political, right? And that we are currently living at a time of significant pushback on women's rights, on gender equality. And it's not by chance. We've got Argentina. When Milei assumed power, the first thing he did, literally on day one, was dismantle the gender ministry. In Russia, we have decriminalized domestic violence so that it's only considered violence if a woman lands in the hospital. And we could go on and on with examples from many countries. And I think that, these issues tie to democracy. They tie up with a number of other worrying patterns that we're seeing around the world. And the reason I mention this is because I think those of us who have been working in this field, who are working in this field, take on a lot, because I often say that we are experienced and exposed to the same kind of gender inequalities that everybody is around the societies that we live, as we're trying to change that. And so just my greatest appreciation to all of the colleagues who have spoken and who are doing this work around the world, particularly at this moment in time of reduced funding and increased aggression. So you have my tremendous appreciation for the work that you do.
So I would like to say an enormous thank you, as you say, for the work that all of the people that spoke today do and shared with us. And I think these conversations, there's a lot still to do. And usually we do, what can we do? But I think we've covered so much today. I would like to thank Julie Broome very much for the time and effort and excellent moderation, bringing out the stories from each one of our panelists in such a respectful and valuable way. I would like to thank the people that attended, and this conversation doesn't end here. We will be looking at other areas as well, and also in the work that we do. So thank you, everybody. A very difficult subject, which I think we did go quite deeply into, thanks to the wonderful interventions. Thank you, and we'll see you at our next one.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. You can unmute.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
This was
very much.
amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye.
Bye, Jen.
Bye, Quinta. Let's connect. Thank
Yes,
you.
let's catch up. Bye, Atlanti.
Okay.
Thank you, bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, Atlante. Bye, everyone. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.